in 3, 2, 1.
Showtime.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is McKaylee. I work at Tattered Cover Bookstore. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thank you for supporting your local independent bookstore. Thank you for shopping locally at mom and pop businesses. Thank you for putting your money in your community. It means the world to us more than you'll ever know. And for us in particular, you're a large part of the reason that we've been able to get through the last year and the last 50 years, because it is Tattered Cover's 50th anniversary, which is a huge deal for a bookstore. And we owe a large part of that support to you, our community, both virtual and eventually, hopefully soon, in person. And so before I go any further, I want to let you know that closed captioning is enabled on this video for those who might want it or need it. There's a black bar at the bottom of the screen with a button labeled CC on it. Click that button and closed captioning is enabled should you want it or need it. We are also, that was hard to say, going to be doing a Q&A session, and there's a chat next to the screen you're watching us on right now. If you have any questions, feel free to type those in the chat and we'll make sure they get to the author and the rest of our guests. A little bit about Tattered Cover Bookstore. We're a local independent bookstore in Denver, Colorado with 4 locations, soon to be 5. We have our brand new children's location opening up very soon, later this summer. And the best way to stay up to date on that is by subscribing to our email newsletter or signing up for subscribing on social media, following us on all the channels. We are very, very active on there, let's be real, but that's the best way to get all the updates. You can also visit our website at tatteredcover.com for all of your bookish needs and shop online as well. You can also look up upcoming events that we have, like even one later tonight with John Branch and his new book, Side Country, or later this week, Lai Tran and her memoir, House of Sticks. So many books coming up and so many events. But tonight we have a very special kind of event. I don't think I've had this many people on one of my events before, nor a musical guest in the way, and lots of panelists. It's going to be very, very exciting. So we're here to talk about David Gessner's newest book, which is called Quiet Desperation, Savage Delight. And I'm excited to welcome him and a variety of guests to join us this evening. So I'm going to change my viewpoint and start with Ed Robertson and David Gessner here. So there we go. Hello, all. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
We're so excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us. I know we have quite an amazing presentation here this evening, so I'm going to turn it over to you all. Just reminding our audience there is Q&A, so feel free to send those questions in anytime. Take it away, gentlemen.
Well, David, I can kick it off since you brought me in to kind of help facilitate this. My name's Ed Robertson, and I actually live in Colorado Springs, and I'm beaming in from my David Gessner inspired backyard shed. David's well known for his coastal shack. And so I built this kind of in David's honor, but it's got all my books, and it's I think it's doing David proud. But I have a podcast called the Mountain and Prairie Podcast where I interview a wide variety of people, and I got to know David through that project. And we really hit it off and had some great conversations. I think he's been on the podcast 3 times now. So I got an advanced copy of this book, and we had and I loved every page of it. I feel like it's just really a perfect book for this crazy time that we're in. And so I just thought maybe we could start out, David, if you could maybe read us a few lines from the book to kind of get us going, and then I'll ask you a few questions, and then I'll keep an eye out on the chat for questions from the listeners, and we can kind of go from there.
Excellent. True confession, I forced Ed to ask me that first question. This is Mark Honerkamp, who's been in many of my books, aka Hones. He made the wise decision many years ago to drop out of college to play ultimate frisbee and move from California to Boston. And Hones has recently moved to the Cape to devote his life to fishing, which seems to be working out quite well for him.
It's a tough life. Somebody's got to do it.
So, and Ed, I asked you to ask me that question, and now I'm not going to read immediately. I just want to say that the publicity material for the new book says, when the pandemic struck, nature writer David Gessner turned to Thoreau, the original social distancer, for lessons on how to live. Those lessons of learning our own backyards, rewilding, loving nature, self-reliance, and civil disobedience hold a secret that can help save us as we face the even greater crisis of climate. I don't want to be too critical of those publicists' comments because I helped write them, but it was really before the pandemic struck, just bizarrely, that I was rebuilding the writing shack that I'd lost in Florence. I was reading a new biography of Thoreau by Laura Walls. I was building an Osprey platform. And as I say in the book, it was like I was studying for a test that I didn't know I had to take. So it was really interesting to have that before. And every chapter of the book is preceded by the pandemic numbers. And the last chapter is March 2021. The first is March 2020. And there were confirmed deaths, 2,977 in that month. And I also want to say, it's easy to say we're learning lessons from this, but I'm a little wary of that too, because my sister was working in a hospital, my mom was in a nursing home, and I lost three dear friends during the pandemic, not to COVID, but certainly COVID didn't help the situation. So I get that I don't want to have the lessons appear too easy. So here's the beginning of the book, which I made you ask me to read. And then we will become more spontaneous after that. 16 years ago, when our daughter was just a baby, my wife and I took her on a trip to Walden Pond. As we approached the place where Henry David Thoreau, I learned to say that during my Thoreau Society readings where they yelled at me for saying Thoreau, where Henry David Thoreau's cabin once stood. With my daughter riding up on my shoulders, I said to her, "That's where the man lived who ruined your father's life." Ruined in a mostly good way, I meant. I discovered Walden when I was 16 and never quite recovered. I began to question the values of the system I found myself in. The life that men praise and call successful is but one kind, Thoreau wrote. And I'm going to repeat that because I know that's one of your favorite lines.
It's one of my favorites.
Having lived the way you've lived, really. The life that men praise, or let me make it gender, the life that we praise and call successful is but one kind. Thoreau was like a more profound, less musical version of getting stoned and listening to Pink Floyd, but the effect was more lasting. I began to keep a journal in high school, and I keep one to this day. After college, the sentences from Thoreau's book were still rippling outward through my life, affecting the choices I made. To hell with law school or any normal career, I would become a writer. I would value solitude, and I would move to my very own Walden. I've been thinking about Thoreau as COVID-19 sweeps across the country, the obvious stuff, he was America's original social distancer, and the not so obvious. Thoreau can serve as a role model of self-reliance, reminding us that pulling back from the world, which at the moment will save lives, has its less dramatic virtues. Having long been a corrective to our compulsive national habits of overbusyness and consumption, he can inspire just such a corrective now, but only if we try to dig below the cliche of him. Because, as it happens, Thoreau was not all flowers and acorns, and this man who died at 44 had some profound and sturdy thoughts, not just about nature, but about death and disaster. There will come a time soon after the pandemic has subsided when we will be trying to make sense of what has happened, when we tell a story about where we are and where we are going, and about how we have changed. For me, at least, Thoreau's ideas will be part of that story. And that's the last thing I'm going to read tonight, because as my wife has always said, kids are trained when they listen to reading to go to sleep. So, I mean, I've probably driven a quarter of our people off already. From here on, we can just talk. You were, Holmes says he was nodding off. So I'm sorry.
Well, one of the first questions I had when I was reading this is because the last time you and I spoke publicly, was a podcast talking about the book just before this one about Theodore Roosevelt. Right. And so I would imagine as you were writing this, you were also promoting the old book. And
yeah,
in a lot of ways, I mean, there's a lot of similarities, but in a lot of ways, Thoreau and TR are pretty starkly different. So how was that transition from going from a manic, don't pull back, get in the middle of everything all the time kind of guy to Thoreau?
I think I'm kind of midsection between the two.
Yeah.
So, and also in the world of the cancel culture, I mean, it was insane to have a book about Teddy come out at that moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
luckily, as you know, a lot of the book deals with Bears Ears and Native American lands and trying to advocate for them, and the contradiction between Teddy's personality and that. But I really feel like, even though people get down on, I'm going to call him Thoreau tonight. We're not with the Black Diamond, scary Thoreau Society people who, like they are. Speaking of that, one of their first questions was, how exactly did Thoreau influence? I hope none of them are here, and I'm not insulting them. How exactly did Thoreau influence Theodore Roosevelt? And I was scrambling, and I said, "Oh, the John Muir was influenced," and they were like, "Wrong. Actually, Roosevelt read The Maine Woods as a sophomore at Harvard." So, yeah. but I mean, he's also an easier sell in this moment. Not that that's the important point.
Yeah.
When the year turns in the book, and we turn towards civil disobedience and Black Lives Matter, it's reflexive to give these people crap, but he was amazingly ahead of his time as far as that goes. He was the one supporter of John Brown early on, the one public supporter.
Mm-hmm.
His speeches are insanely political and proactive. So it's easier to have this book come out in a way. And
Yeah.
for me, it's kind of a, as you know, for all my books, part of it is how to live. What can I take from them? And it's a little nicer to be dealing with Henry after frenetic years of Teddy, who I know you love, but who also, I mean, I'm 60. I just turned 60. It's no surprise Teddy died at 60. He crammed a lot in, right?
Uh-huh. So I know Thoreau's been just a huge part of your life, huge influence. I mean, obviously, just from the opening pages of the book and just our conversations. I mean, I know probably one of the most influential people that you never met. But I mean, I feel like when I'm thinking about TR, I kind of challenge people to ask me questions because I'm like, I know it all. But I would imagine in writing a book about Thoreau, I would imagine you uncovered some new stuff that maybe you didn't know before. So, I mean, what were some new lessons that you gained from going deep into the mind of Thoreau over the last year?
Well, kind of to follow on what we were just saying, it was crazy how apt he was for those early months.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I have traveled a good deal in Concord. This is a guy who celebrated his backyard, who said, if you know your home place, you know every place.
Backyards were much cooler back then.
Well, his backyard was pretty awesome. But as you know, I've defined myself against him in a way because the Wendell Berries of the world and the Thoreaus of the world use the marriage metaphor and commit to one place. And I call myself a polygamist of place, having loved the Cape where we are right now, living in Carolina, this is my first Carolina book, and also Colorado. So, but that moment of the pandemic, everybody was, who's laughing now was a McSweeney's article about Thoreau saying, "Hey, you liberal arts professors, I was right after all," because we had to learn our backyards. And for me, that meant the fiddler crabs, it meant the bird migration, it meant seeing that this supposed time of isolation was really a time of connection. And so there was that. There was the rewilding, which we saw. My favorite image were the mountain lions walking down Main Street, Boulder, in the snow. And then, just as, then I published a piece. This is kind of the inside baseball part. I published a piece that was popular with American Scholar, and suddenly I started thinking book. Like, what if I wrote this book as the year was happening? And it would have gotten a little boring if I'd kept hammering the nature points. But sure enough, as the year turned, and as we got into the George Floyd protest and everything, there was Henry, a major, if not the major influence on Martin Luther King and an influence on Gandhi. So I guess the surprise was how well he worked going out into the world as well as kind of withdrawing from the world.
Yeah, and I didn't realize any of that. The way you link in, the George Floyd, when all that happened, and the way that you link that back to Thoreau was so interesting to me. And I knew it would be a good book from the social distancing side of things, but the way it's almost crazy how it links in with so many different aspects of where we are today. Given where I'm sitting right now, and I don't know that we've ever fully talked about this, but I want you to tell the folks that are watching who may not have read any of your stuff about your shack, because I thought that was one of the first things that I saw about you. And I was like, I want a shack. And now I have my version. It's not quite as cool, but talk about the shack a little bit.
This is perfect timing because poor Michael, who's my colleague at UNCW. All right, here we go.
There we go.
Yeah, this is all right. So I'm going to give you can see those, everybody. I'm not very high tech. So Michael, I'll just say next. How about that? Because this poor Michael has been doing these talks with me and I just veer wildly this way and that, and he tries to figure it out. So part of being a writer, and part of this book is about the luxury of failure.
This is right after your 50th.
Yeah. So there's like the luxury of failure, kind of like you have everybody, all those assholes at cocktail parties who were like rich guys who said, don't be a writer, there's no money in it. They were right. they were right. So for 17 years I didn't publish anything, and so we didn't. My wife's a novelist who just sold a show to HBO, but that's a different story. We didn't buy our first house till we were 50, and Mark, who's here with me, Holmes, who's here with me, came down and we had a keg party on my 50th. And the next morning, this is the next morning, I got up.
No, the next morning after I left.
No, it was like we went to the
that's right.
I got up and started no, you please talk. Actually, you're right. It's probably all right. It's 2 mornings later. I started slamming this thing together, and the rule was no power tools. And that rule came about not for some moral reason, but because I got a saw that I was supposed to put together myself, and I said I'm not going to use any saw that David Gessner put together. Cut my arm off. So this is a good one. Let's go to the next one, Michael. So it's turned out this, the early shack was kind of shabby, but it's all right. I should point out my front yard is like a kind of tacky, condo-y neighborhood. My backyard is this cool peninsula and it's hidden behind a magnolia tree, but at tides it started to flood. And let's go to the next one. And then at Florence, that was trouble. We got about 8 feet of water and it looked like it was heading out to sea, and I was waving it off. Oh, and I should point out, Douglas Cutting is going to come in later. I totally ripped him off. He's got the shack, the name of the shack came from him, and Aldo Leopold and Douglas Cutting, his great place. All right, let's go to the next one. So this is how it stood for about 7 months after Hurricane Florence. And I'd still go in there and try to write, and it's like a Batman villain thing where it was all tilted. Okay, onward, Michael. And so I rebuilt it, and it's illegal. So hopefully none of my neighbors are hearing this, but I decided I would make it a boat. So I got like 25 boogie boards and styrofoam that I put below it so it would rise with the water. Next. So this is the new shack, what my wife calls the fancy shack. And one of the things about it, one of the main things in the book is I write about Thoreau's journals and how I was an ambitious young writer who would write these big clunky novels where people would quote Thoreau to each other. And I wrote 5 novels that went nowhere. At the same time, I was keeping years and years of journals. And ultimately, I turned it into wanting to use my journal voice. And that's when I first published my first book, when I started using my journal voice. The shack is kind of the metaphoric equivalent of that, where I write in my office in the morning and I charge ahead and do my hours. And then in the evening, I come down here and have a beer. And a lot of my best sentences have come from there. All right, Michael, you can start. Just click through them. There I am with a Hawaiian shirt on, whatever. Go, go, go. Oh, that's from the first. That's actually at Alan Poole's house.
Okay.
But that was what I was going to lie and use for the Walden picture. All right, skip ahead. Oh, this is me. This is very creepy. Pause here for a second. I bought this at the Thoreau shop, and when I spoke, the lips moved, and it really deeply troubled people. All right, go, Michael. That's a drawing I did at Thoreau, strangling woodchuck. Another one. Go, go. Oh, so the book is dedicated to my dear friend who I met down here on Cape Cod, Brad Watson. And I was a little worried about the dedication, but it said, for Brad Watson, fellow writer and drinker and great friend. And Brad, like me, had many novels that didn't, he was a great writer, but he had many novels that didn't go anywhere. And we both thought of them as kind of like nurse logs out of which our future work grew. All right, Mike, you can just go. For this is Brad and Nina and me at the Cape House, you know.
Well, I took the picture.
Yeah. This is me. I'm a little heavy, but whatever. Go. Oh, I don't know what to say. Oh, Black Skimmers. I watched them through the year, the Thoreau year. All right. Zip, zip, zip. Oh, yeah. Well, let's go back to that one, for God's sakes. That's what I talked about with rewilding. That idea that what if we took 2 months off every year from flying and driving, and here we are. That's like cool. That's main, you know, that's in the middle of Boulder.
Wow.
All right. Zips out of duty. I think they're, I mean, Thoreau books. Yeah. Thoreau. Yeah. Oh, Jen Pollock. So when I started the pandemic, I was chair of our department, and I always said it was like playing Space Invaders and shooting down emails, and I was online all the time. I got to go home, and then I got to come back in, and I had our whole creative writing department to myself. And then Jen knocked on my door, and I was freaked out, like, who's coming in? And she came in and started talking to me, and she said, oh, you should see it at night. Coyotes are walking down Chancellor's Walk, and deer are nibbling at the rec center. So I hadn't seen her for a year, and I saw her like 3 days ago and gave her that book. All right, I think we're bored with pictures. Thank you. Oh, that's Hadley. We like Hadley. That's Thoreau with the cell phone.
Up at the place.
Oh, wait, let's go back one, and then it's all you, Ed. So this was my neighbor, my Trump-supporting neighbor. This is what he gave me the night after the election. So not everybody was claiming it was, and one of the things I say in the book is Thoreau was a great neighbor, and that's underrated. All right, I'm shutting up. That's it. We'll do that later. Michael, but you're off duty. Thank you.
No, that's great. I love seeing those shack pictures. I remember when it got flooded, and I was heartbroken because I didn't know you were going to rebuild. So anyway,
The second shack is truly an upgrade.
Yeah, it looks like it's 2 stories. Well, we're almost at the bottom of the hour, and so I was thinking maybe now we could bring in some of our other folks. One of whom is one of my best friends, and kind of I credit him with me and you meeting, David, the great Douglas Cutting. But I'll let you introduce everybody else.
Well, you know, first I want to say it's so great what you've done, you know, in terms of, you know, the way you've been a passionate advocate of writers, and I really appreciate it. So Douglas Cutting, who Hones knows too.
Hey, Doug.
Good evening.
Went fishing with.
Good evening.
What in a long ago life was a student of mine, but is a great writer, environmentalist, and we're really psyched to have him here. And of course, fisherman. This guy is an everyday fisherman.
I'm happy to see you,
I hope you
Holmes.
still are, Doug. You're still fishing, right?
Oh yeah, man.
Dan Roddick.
Right now, all I'm thinking about is what I need for tomorrow morning. You know, what nets do I have the right bait well net? But yeah, man, it's an honor to be here with you, man. And I've, you know, it's been inspiring reading this, a little bit of the book. I actually just got started. So I'm 100 pages or so in, but really enjoying that. And there's never been anybody in my life that makes me want to start writing stuff down more than you. So I've got a piece of cardboard beside me that I've been jotting stuff down on, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, that's funny because part of the book is really about writing. It's about the art of living, but it's also about the art of writing and how you get it, how you start it and how you get the momentum going and how you juice it up. And we also have Dan Roddick, who is known as Stork in the Ultimate community. Anybody who picked up a Frisbee in days of yore saw his name on the Frisbee.
Original 80 mold.
And I know for Mark, this is a huge thrill to have him here. But Dan is also a big reader and just reread Walden on one of his camping trips. So welcome, Dan.
Nice.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah. And of course, we have Randy Ricks, my dear old friend who was going to maybe play us a little music.
Yeah, I need to hear that harp.
Yeah, who is a great ultimate player, Hall of Fame ultimate player, but also an amazing musician. So whatever you want, Randy, you'll feel it out.
Thank you.
Feeling it out right now.
It's Gessner time.
Yeah. Randy, isn't it fun to see Hones?
It is.
Remember when we were hanging behind you?
With me last time I saw him.
Yes. That cool little patio you had in the backyard. That was awesome.
I don't know if it's 5 years or 10 years or 100 years. Everything is blurred to me now.
Probably about 12.
12 years ago.
I know time is
That's true.
it's cruel.
Well, great to see you, Hones.
You too, Randy.
So I've written about Hones a lot in different books, and it's kind of cool to have him here.
Professional sidekick.
Yeah, he wanted to get cards made called Professional Sidekick.
Panto, he's your Kimosabi.
So I want to
Let's focus.
let's go back to let's focus on me for God's sakes. It's not like
Absolutely.
So I want to let Dan and Randy and Douglas just go whatever way you want. I mean, we can't see because it's YouTube. For all we know, it's just the seven of us talking. So let's just talk. Hopefully it's like 407, but it might be 7. So. Dan, I'd love to hear what you felt on reading Walden again while you were camping just now.
Well, I shared with you privately what a exciting experience it was, and I was amazed by how many really vivid phrases I remembered from 50 years ago when I read it. But one of the things that really struck me of many was how absolutely precisely Thoreau laid out the philosophy for the tiny house movement. And I thought, let's take a moment and speculate on something we're talking and thinking about now that will be relevant in the year 3000.
Right.
I mean, extraordinary as you go through there. And I'm sure that's part of what attracted you to it. And that's part of my practical question. Given how incredibly this lined up with the times and knowing how convoluted a process it is to get a book from concept to publication, how in the world did you ever manage this perfect timing? It's amazing to me.
Well, the previous book, the Teddy Roosevelt book, was with Simon & Schuster, which is a big publisher, obviously. And during the year, as I mentioned to Ed, I was starting to write about Thoreau, and I had an essay come out in maybe May or June in American Scholar that got a big reaction. And it occurred to me that because of what Douglas was talking about, the process of momentum and discipline with writing, I knew I was going every day I write, holidays, Sundays, I write 4 hours a day. And so I was like, this could be an interesting experiment in writing on the heels of experience. So then when the world started turning political, and Thoreau was still kind of leading the wedge in a way. And I live in a town where in 1898, there was the one coup in American history where the whiteys overthrew the majority Black population in Wilmington, North Carolina. I was like, shit, you know, sometimes when you're writing, crazy things start to connect. And then so I wrote to my Simon and Schuster people, and I knew they couldn't do it because generally you hand a book in and 2 years later the book comes out.
Exactly.
So then I remembered Tory House Press, which is related to Teddy Roosevelt, Ed, where they were the ones who put out a booklet and gave it to Congress and Obama called Red Rock Stories, where they pushed for Bears Ears National Monument. They did a beautiful job with it. So I reached out to them and they said, well, we can't give you much money. And I said, I don't care. They said, we can't give you much publicity. I said, I don't care. And I said, all I care about is the timing. I want it to be the first thoughtful book about the pandemic. And they said, well, we could maybe get it out in September of 2021. And then I channeled, you know, my businessman dad and just kept quiet. And they said, maybe June. And I was like, let's do June. And we charged ahead and you know, it was crazy. So I was classmates, you know, the last chapter's in March 2021, which is nuts for a book. And I don't know, maybe 13 people are going to buy it, but it was kind of a challenge to myself. And the tiny house movement thing, yeah, I think the houses will get tinier, or it'll be like a Talking Head song where you know, we've got our shotguns and we're roaming the countryside kind of thing.
A quick follow-up on activism that has been, particularly in the Teddy book and in this one. Do you think of these as kind of Trojan horses that somehow can span the divide? Because when you look at the great work of Bill McKibben, I mean, people who don't agree probably never get past the cover. But in this, I think that maybe there's a hope that people will get pulled in and then you get to deliver your message. Is that any part of your thinking?
Well, you know, I had a senior moment during your first question where I couldn't remember Jamie Raskin's name, who was my college classmate. But Bill McKibben was also my college classmate. And in the book, I have an essay about the trickle-down theory of poster. He was my editor at the Harvard Crimson. And he is in this, I love Bill's work, but it's in the spirit of MSNBC or, you know, it's advocacy. And mine, like you said, is hopefully Trojan horse advocacy. We were just talking, Mark and I, about Ryan, who was the hunting guide during the Tarball Chronicles, a book I wrote. And he was he was a big guy, hunter, conservative, who he would a fisherman, and he would mock me and say, Obama's your president. So he was the main character. I'm not saying, I mean, I don't, who the hell knows how many people read nature books. I'm not saying I'm going to succeed, but I do try to like break across that a little bit. So I appreciate that.
Nice. Last question. If he had been born 125 years later, do you think Thoreau would have been a good ultimate Frisbee teammate?
Nah, he wasn't a good teammate. He was like Hunter Kemp. He was too much of a loner. He was too thorny, you know. Like he wasn't like Thoreau. It took him a long time to. We used to call him Bummer Camp. He would bum out sometimes. Like I feel like that's the thing with Thoreau. He didn't drink. He said water is the only drink for a wise man. He was like, you know, so he wasn't a good. He was no good time Charlie.
He was a square. He was a square. But he had great ideas.
Athletically, it sounded like he could walk pretty well, and he was vigorous. You know? Yeah. Holmes, you take the questions. I got to go pee.
No way.
He'll take care of it.
Have some water.
Ask me anything about Dave. I'll fill you in. I met Dave in 1982 when I first moved to Boston, and we recruited him to the Hostages Ultimate Team from Harvard. But almost one of the first things he told me about was his obsession with Thoreau. So he's been around that Concord guy for quite some time.
Holmes, I have a question. I have a question for you. There's
Sure.
a guy. He may have come along after you guys are playing. His name's Rob Blyberg, and he works in the conservation community here with me in Colorado. And I told him that I knew David, and Rob's comment. He said something like, "David, I'm so happy for all his writing success, but what he was best at is stealing beer from the other team's coolers
Oh my
during
goodness,
games."
Dave was
Is that true?
expert at doing that. Rob Blyberg, is that the Colorado Rob? Oh,
Yeah.
excellent man, Rob Blyberg. But Dave is a professional at procuring beer from.
It wasn't always from the cooler. He grabbed it right out of my hand. Right out of my hand.
It's like the first time we met, Randy. Randy, why don't you play us a little music as a little interlude? You got anything?
It's Narian philosophy for 10.
Beautiful.
What book did David Gessner encounter an aged nature writer from Cape Cod?
Final Jeopardy answer.
I'm sorry, I did it the wrong way.
What famous
Hey, David.
sidekick of this nature author was sometimes known as Gessner's Tonto? What is Holmes? Ed, I know Rob Blyberg really well.
Yeah. Colorado boys.
All right.
Yeah, Rob's great. I've learned a lot from him in the conservation world. I'm hoping to go out and see him in about a month, actually.
Yeah, I miss him. He would come and crash at my house when he came into these big meetings in Denver, but of course they've all been called off.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed getting to know him.
Yeah, great guy.
Carolina?
No, Rob's in Western. He's in Grand Junction.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Douglas, I want to talk to you a little bit too.
I had a couple thoughts.
Can you tell these guys about your beautiful book that you just created?
Well, it's been a pretty cool labor of love. It's really highlighting my mom's phenomenal black and white photography, and I was fortunate enough to get to kind of frame her work with a few of my words. But yeah, cool project. Learned a lot. Learned a lot about the publishing, experience and ups, downs, waiting, all of it. And the end result has been just super cool. Really almost this like emotional thing that I didn't know I had, that I didn't know was going on until I went and did my first ever book launch reading at an event in Charlotte recently. And it was cool. It was so overwhelming and real. It really struck me. And I was thinking about this a minute ago when you were talking about, and I thought about one of the early passages in your book that I enjoyed about, like sort of rejecting the title of nature writer and how,
right.
Initially rejecting it because I've gone through so much of the same as like nature / outdoor writer, and when I try to describe what I write about or do, and how you feel like you sort of pigeonhole or you're eliminating so much of the world or your audience. And so I go to this reading thinking that, like in a little bit, in some ways, pessimistic about, what these bankers in Charlotte think about you know,
Sure.
this coffee table book with, you know, excerpts about, you know, a fly rod and a redfish and a clam and, you know, a blue crab and the moon, you know, wouldn't really strike anybody. And instead it was like the complete opposite, you know, and so I think if I'm doing like a really broad sweep, the whole sort of pandemic era, a lot of my work in land brokerage and, you know, conservation property that I do, this book project has taught me that lots of people want to connect with,
Yeah.
you know, and lots of people want to get back to simplicity and to, you know, it's easy to say to nature. It's not quite that simple, but it was really interesting to see how many people came up and wanted to talk about, you know, a cast net after that. And so
Yeah.
cool experience. And then I, you know, and you're going back to what you wrote, rejecting being a nature writer and then realizing that it's really important to be a nature writer, you know, in times like these in a way. And so thought that was a cool circle.
Thank you. And I think, and I'm really glad that happened. And I think that for me, you know, my first book was about my dad dying and about recovering from testicular cancer. And I was really upset that they called me a nature writer. And then the next book was about Colorado and regions being important. And they called me a nature writer. And that's why I wrote Sick of Nature.
Yep.
But like you said, I've re-embraced it. And I promised I wasn't going to read again, but because you said that, I'm going to read this recent short excerpt from LitHub about failure, because that's the other interesting thing is that, you know, we talk about nature. It also, you know, it also connects to an alternate way of being. So this starts like this. I have known plenty of failure in my writing life. Inspired partly by Thoreau, I set out to be a writer after college, which effectively meant that I worked part-time as a carpenter and bookseller for the next dozen years without publishing a word. My current day job is as a teacher in a creative writing program at a university. And if I were to give truly honest advice about how to succeed as a writer to my grad students, this would be it. Work really hard for a really, really long time. Do it every day. Reject rejections. Refuse to let others convince you that what you are doing is wrong or not good enough. Build up muscles of nonconformity. And also, sometimes getting angry helps. Show the bastards. Anything that gives you energy. When that asshole at the cocktail party laughs in response to your answer, nothing, when he asks what you have published, store it as fuel. I'm not going to read the whole thing because Holmes got bored and left, but I'm gonna read the last line, which is basically about Thoreau after his first book didn't sell, which is, I'll read the last 3 lines. I'm going to try to slow down my life and slow down time, knowing I will fail. I'm going to do the work I love and care about, not merely the work that the world rewards me for. And finally, I'm going to try to remember that the work is important for what it is, not how the world regards it. Anyway, you know, having had a lot of students, you among them, I just feel like writing is about more than, I mean, you go into it thinking, I'm going to be famous, I'm going to be Hemingway. And then it becomes something different along the way.
Yep. Really
Okay,
good.
open the chat for audience questions. Okay.
Yeah, David, there's a question that kind of follows up on that about your daily writing process. And I think that it says, what does your daily writing process look like? And I think that's one of the things that stands out so much about you is just this commitment for year after year after year after year. So can you just elaborate so people get an idea of your commitment?
Yeah. In fact, I don't know if Michael's still with us. I guess he is. But if he wants to put up on the screen my like 1 page I just did of writing advice, he can. He might. I totally appreciate it if he's not here. But for me, this is it. Link your writing time to something else, something pleasurable: running, walking, drinking coffee, meditating, listening to music. Give your writing time a feel of ritual. For me, it's getting up early. It's not. I tell students there are plenty of great writers. I know some who are late at night, but you need to carve out a space in the day that's your own space, right? And momentum for me is everything. If you're rolling on a project and you do 2 good days, do a third and keep going, because once you're stopped, you can shrivel up and just feel like it's all stopped. And number 3 is the driving question. What am I excited about? I had a very kind of businessman, anal dad who came down on me and was like, oh, if I got a 98, he'd say, what happened to the other 2 points on the test, So for me, it took a long time to realize that what freed me up was being excited about stuff. And also weirdly, when I resolve to do something and I rebel against it, sometimes that frees energy. But I will say that the biggest thing that students don't seem to get is it doesn't have to be late November, listening to Neil Young and it's rainy to feel inspired. You can get inspired every day if you start kind of ingraining it into your life, right? Like the way you do running or whatever else you do in your life. And it becomes a habit. And so you can be kind of habitually inspired, which is pretty sweet. I always feel, even during hard times, like I've lost 3 good friends in the last year. And it's my solace to wake up and go to my writing and be engaged with that, rather than my things to do list, rather than my daily crises, to be engaged with the writing itself. Thank you, Michael. That'll work. Awesome.
And
here's
one that here's another question that came in. What is the greatest lesson that Thoreau can teach us in this modern cybernetic world? And I would say,
I guess it's a pretty basic, as you know, one of my favorite quotes comes from Reg Sonner, my Colorado professor. We humans are an elsewhere. Think of that, how infrequently you really are where you are, and you're focused on what you're focused on. You're zipping and, you're jumping into the future, hurtling into the past, worried. As we get older, we're worried about death. We're worried about many things, like how infrequently we're absorbed in the present. And it's funny, I said to somebody the other day, a weird thing about my writing is I'm both a hippie and an anti-hippie. I feel like, and Randy, this might be your baby Jesus and whatever, the big machine or whatever it is. What is it called?
Big Bang Baby Jesus.
Big Bang Baby Jesus. But for me, like, I came from a very sarcastic family and a very knock it down family, and I still have that. But on the other hand, like being in the present, when I hear that, I'm like, that sounds like some groovy thing. But it's really been a goal of me to get absorbed and be in the moment. I mean, you can't beat death, right? We're all hurtling toward death at this point, but you can try to make, I think the Thoreauvian lesson, even though he dies at 44, is trying to make the life, doing what you passionately love, caring about things outside of yourself, which is a huge thing. Like John Hay, I went up to his house today on Cape Cod. He said, human beings think they can solve the problems of the mind through their minds. They can't. They have to look outward beyond their minds. So, I don't know if that answered your question, Ed.
No, that was good. That's good.
What is it? What are we drinking, Hounds? The tequila is starting to kick in.
So we got about 3 minutes left. And here's a question from an ultimate player. Advice for an ultimate player in his 40s on how do you know when it's time to stop playing competitively?
40s, man, you got decades together. Are you kidding? I was playing like 3 times a week. Randy, I was so bummed I sucked so much at that last Nationals. I started playing again, and it was really fun. And I think it's actually easier on your body than jogging. You're on grass if you have good cleats, and he's a punk kid, 40s. So, here it comes the closer.
I'm so
It made my stomach drop.
Yeah.
I know I could let you all talk and talk.
Can Randy play? Can Randy play us out with something?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was gonna offer that as an option of we would love to hear maybe one quick song from you, and then I can close this out for the evening, Mr. Randy.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to see everyone. And I did just record 3 new songs. One's called The Joker, and it's about the Nuggets NBA player, parody. One's called When the Rubber Hits the Road, and one's called Put Your Phone Down. And I will quote the rubber hits the road. When the rubber hits the road and the spirit meets the soul and the flesh becomes the bone, most were looking at their phone.
Come over here fast.
That's what you remind me of. But thank you so much. I don't know what you want to hear, but I can play.
Who's just served the oysters?
Someday when this is over, we'll be gay, smiling and laughing together, even if 6 feet away. That's when I want to hug you. First, I should ask. And even if you decline me, you're lovely in your mask. When science opens one door, the others close. 1, 2, 3. The doubt and uncertainty can bring the strongest human to their knees.
Thank you, Randy.
There's no place like home.
Yeah. So one of the things home serves as is kind of my butler, and as you may have noticed, he's brought me my manservant has brought me some oysters. So
All
apparently
right.
we have to leave, and so I can dine.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, not just you panelists here, but also all of you watching out there this evening. If you missed any part of this, use the link that you clicked on to watch to go back, and it's all recorded, so you can watch any of that now or at a later date. If you want to rewatch it, please do. Share with your friends. You can also get David's newest book, Quiet Desperation, Savage Delight, Sheltering with Thoreau in an Age of Crisis, at tatteredcover.com. We thank you all so much for supporting local independent bookstores.
And I promise to not write a book for a really long time and not self-promote for a really long time. And Douglas is like walking across the marshes.
But that's impossible.
Well, gentlemen, if you'll stick around while I just close this out here for the evening. Thank you all again for joining us. For some of you out there, it's dinner time. Think about supporting a local mom and pop shop. We appreciate you so much. Once again, this has been Quiet Desperation and Savage Delight by David Gessner, which you can get at tatteredcover.com. Stay safe, everybody, and happy reading. Good night, all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
And we're out.